Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. So in this video we're going to swap out the front coil springs on a Mini Cooper Diesel F55 5-door model. Stay tuned. So I've already got these off the car. Basically to remove these are 13mm bolts on the top. You have a cap to remove also, so remove the cap, remove 2 of the bolts, loosen one of the bolts, and that'll mean that the top is nice and loose for the next step. So you then come down to your drop link, which goes down to your sway bar. That is a 16mm bolt and a Torx T30. You basically insert this inside the drop link, and then using your ratchet or your spanner, just unscrew it. And the last part is the bottom bit that goes into the hub. Basically 70mm on one end, using a ratchet, windy gun, whatever you want to use, breaker bar. You need a 16mm to get off the nut. Basically remove that, and then remove the entire bolt. So there's actually a bracket that goes to the rear that actually carries your brake line. So that once the bolt's removed, that should just pull straight out. And the next part's quite tricky. So basically, this is still supported with one bolt at the top, so it's quite loose. You got a bit of play. The way I get this off is basically saturate WD-40. What you want is a WD-40 to pull and then to go down. And if you look at the bottom, you should see it coming out the bottom. Once it's coming out the bottom, basically, the way I do it, might be a better way to do this, is stand up, put your foot on the hub, and just give it 2 or 3 good stomps down, and you'll notice this will start to move, and you'll see this line, this like rust line almost, start to appear. I'll then go ahead, put some more WD down, and then once this is fully released, you should be able to wiggle the hub back and forwards while pushing down, and you should be able to push it down far enough so you start to see the bottom sticking out. As soon as you see the bottom, just push up and pull this away while pulling the hub the other direction, and this will basically just come out at an angle and then just drop. Go back to the top, release that last nut, and then remove the whole entire strut. You're looking at these right now and thinking, well, these are fine, these don't need to be replaced, and you are correct. They're absolutely fine. There's no problems with these springs whatsoever. The problem I do have is the ride height. So basically the front of the car is a lot lower than the rear of the car. Now I have just replaced the rear coil springs. I'll put a link for that down in the description. And basically after I put the rear coil springs on, the back of the car is almost twice as high as the front. It wasn't obvious before. Now maybe that was because the back springs have been snapped for some time and I just never noticed. But as soon as I put the new springs on, the front was too low. The gap was tiny. It almost looked lowered, whereas the back looked stock, looked OEM. The front, they look way too low, and I think it's the springs. So a bit of history of the car. This car was involved in an accident a few years ago. I bought it as a salvage car. It was the passenger side that took the hit. So this entire leg was completely destroyed on the passenger side. So I could have just went out and picked up a replacement passenger side, complete leg off eBay, but I wanted to make sure the ride height was going to be perfect. So I went out and picked up 2. Now I picked these up. This part number for the shock is 2411. That is the correct one for my car. Looking online and contacting B&W, that is what they advised that I should replace on my car to make it stock OEM. I did that. These are from the same car, and I put them onto the Mini Cooper. I thought they were fine. Now, when I purchased these, I bought these using that number. I never considered the spring was different. I just assumed the spring was the same between all these Mini Coopers. So as I say, this is Cooper 1 Diesel, Cooper S, Cooper Diesel. So I'm a bit surprised because these, when I checked the list and when I look back through my receipts, I found out these actually came from a 3-door petrol, not a diesel. This is a 5-door Mini, so the 5-door I'm assuming is a heavier car. I guess these springs aren't up to the job of a 5-door car, and that's why it's running lower. So when I repaired the car, obviously the passenger side was completely shot. The driver's side was okay. So I sold that on, but on the passenger side, the spring was okay. So this is actually the spring that came with this car from factory. So when I take these off, it might be interesting to compare these with a factory spring. Now I'm assuming this is going to be a fraction taller than these ones here. I hope that's the case, because if that is true, that is my problem. If this spring is identical to that spring, then we've got another issue because the car is running way too low. You're probably thinking, well, I know for a fact this is the OEM part number. This is definitely the correct shock for this car. It's the spring that's in question. This is the spring that came with the car from factory. So yes, I could put this spring on and I could have just picked up the one. But this spring's old, this spring's new, and I like to replace things in pairs, especially involving suspension. So I'll put these both on. I'll keep this as a spare. If one of these decide to snap, then this one will be worn, so I can put on a worn one. So hopefully it'll kind of balance out. So I'll keep this one as a spare, but I will not be using these ones again. This car is approaching 100,000 miles. Now when we got this car, it only had, I think, 18,000 miles. I got these second hand, so I have no idea what mileage he's done before I got them, but this car has done at least 70,000 miles that I'm aware of. And I don't know if it's because I do snow foam the car, and I always clean the wheel arches and I always clean down the suspension. I don't know if that is why, or if it's just the actual design of the spring itself, but these springs look perfectly fine. I mean, for a car that's pushing out to 100,000 miles, it's quite impressive. As you can see, the boots have perished. I do have some genuine replacement ones to put on, so let's get these springs off and let's get the new ones on. So these are the two old ones, and they seem to be the same height. They're obviously from the same car, so, and they've got this white sticker here which I think indicates what kind of spring it is maybe. But these seem to be the same height, and this is the replacement one. Feels much thicker. Maybe that's because these are quite thin. If you compare the, I don't know if you notice on camera, but this looks a bit chunkier, so maybe that's the difference in the ride height. But if we put these at the same, so the tail end's about there, and the flick at the top is about there. So if we measure them up side by side, is that taller? A fraction, probably quarter inch, if that. But that could be enough. So what do we have? We have 13.4. This one is 12.8. So this is a bit thicker than this one, and it's a fraction taller. So hopefully, that being the case, this actually might raise the car up that 4 centimeters that I need. That is the top, isn't it? Yeah, because you've got this like flat spot here and here. This kind of has a flat spot, but it's definitely, that's round, so that's, yeah, goes that way. So it's time to reassemble. We have the new boot. This is actually genuine B&W. What's interesting is how much this is actually compressed. As you can see, it's dropped an inch. But we've got a new boot. We have the strut. Strut's fine. I've tested it. For those guys that are interested how you test these, basically apply pressure. It should be quite even and consistent, and then when you leave go, it'll come back up. Also, the pressure you push down with and the speed should be the same when you're pulling it back up. You know if these are faulty. If you push it down and you're pushing and it just drops, or it clunks, or it shakes as it's going down, that's a nut at the top. It shakes as it's going down, that's, oh no, so if it's wet around here, that's an indication that your seals are gone, or the piston's short, or the, you know, it needs replacing basically. But this is perfectly fine. So what I'll do is, this cap's actually came off, doesn't normally come off, so I'll just put some grease around this and put that back in place. So that's back on. It's quite important that's on as well, because the dust boot fits over this and it ties down underneath, and this stops anything from going underneath. The dust boot protects things from coming at it, but if obviously you've got a big opening at the bottom here, anything can get up there. So this basically goes over and sits around that like a seal. You then set your spring. It only goes one way. If you try to put it with the halo side, like it's like a perfect circle, it basically just won't fit. So you put this over. As I was saying, and you rotate it so it ties up against that bump stop, but it fits in snug all the way around. There's a trick with these which I never seem to get right, and it's trying to put the cap on the top. You can pretty much guarantee these springs are going to get in the way. Happens all the time, but we'll try and see what happens. So might be alright actually. So your brand new dust boot. You can normally put these on first, but because there's a cup underneath, it needs to go on with the spring. And there's a little tab, like a little notch, and that needs to touch up against the end of the coil spring. And then when it's all in place, that will push down. Slide this over that cap I was talking about. Once you've got that over that isn't going anywhere, so it means no dirt or debris can get from underneath. Pull the little ridges out. Just double check it's still in place, which it is. Don't forget your bump stop, very important. And then your top hat. Check your bearing. Perfectly fine. And this quite simply slides on over the top. Can we see the ball through the top? So I need to tighten these down a bit more. Had to use a few extra clamps, so that could be a good indication that the spring itself wasn't the right spring, because it took 2 to get it off. It took 3 to get it back on. So you basically just push down the top hat, get the bolt and thread it on enough so it's not going to come off. And that is basically it. The next job is to remove the springs and then using a windy gun, tie down the nut, and you should be good to go. And that is basically it. So important things to check. One, that nut is fully tightened down. You can actually use a torque bit and a deep socket and a ratchet or something around the socket to tighten it down and torque it down, but the impact gun works perfectly fine. Secondly, is the spring. The top of the spring should come up and make contact with that rubber bump stop. If that is in place, then this bit here, see this, how there's nothing there and it gets chunkier as it actually has a profile coming down, and that lines up with the spring, so that's fine. And the bottom is tied in nicely. If this is a tiny bit out, don't worry, once you start driving it will settle itself in, but as long as it's kind of in place. If it's completely off, take it off, redo it, but that should be fine. Bit of a clean up and that's ready to go. Yeah, and this is starting to come away, so this is rubbish now. It's quite important that you do replace these, and they do fail. One, in the UK it's MOT failure, and secondly, your bearings at the top, this actually sits in between your spring and the bearings, so it's just a bit more protection really for the bearings. Otherwise your spring will be riding directly on the top. So this, for example, it's rubber and it probably will be okay, and the spring itself shouldn't do any damage. If you can imagine, but that extra bit of protection just means there's an extra layer of rubber in between the two, just to protect the bearings. Also, it stops any dirt and debris from going in that gap there. And two, it's actually, as I pointed out before, you see how it slopes up? It's flat, and then it ridges up to catch the spring. That's just to support it before the first coil comes into play. And also it's got a little bump stop here so the spring can't jump out. But yeah, that's it guys, quite simple. So I'll get the next one done and I'll get back to you. Just something I do before I put these away, and I usually put some fresh on before I use them. Just a tiny bit of oil, not much, not even special oil, that's just bicycle chain oil that. And then basically just wind them in and out. And that is it, that's them ready for this time you need them. And you know they're going to work. So, just so you know, there's an L and there's also an R, left and right, just so you know which side these go on. It's pretty straightforward, to be fair. When you get them to the car, your drop link attaches here, and if the drop link doesn't line up, you've clearly put the wrong side on that side, so just switch them around. But yeah, R for right, L for left. When you install them, these are keyed, so there's these two notches here. Got to make sure these two notches and all three holes line up. Also there's this like circular lump here, this impact mark, that'll also line up also. So put this under the wheel arch, get lined up, just put one bolt in, probably halfway in, just so it's hanging there, and then go down, push down the hub, and then while pushing down the hub, angle this and slide it in the hub. This is also keyed, there's a little notch at the back there like a pin, that'll only slide in at the back and it won't go anywhere else. If it's getting stuck, it's probably because of that, and that needs to go all the way down till it's flush. Attach your drop link, tighten that up, put the bolt through the bottom of the hub and tighten that up. Go at the top, put these three in, tighten them up, and then you're good to go. So that's it, the springs have been replaced and they're both back installed in the car. Simple as that, guys. So basically what do you need? Well, you're going to need some spring compressors, because you can't take the top hat off without spring compressors. You'll just end up injuring yourself. So spring compressors and some oil for the threads. For the top of the strut, you need a screwdriver to remove the black caps at the top. You need a 13mm socket to remove the three top bolts. On one side you will need a spanner to get access to one of them, or you can remove the actual cowl. Moving down to the drop link, 16mm and a T30 Torx bit. T30 Torx bit in the centre of the bolt. Then release the nut using the ring spanner. And then for the hub, you will need a 16mm for the nut and an 18mm for the head. And quite simply just remove it. And once you get the spring compressed, you'll need to remove the top hat. To remove that, you need an 18mm socket. Like I say, you can put this over the top, get your Torx bit down the centre, put some ratchets or something on this to release it. However, I just use the impact gun, put it on the top, then remove the nut. Simple as that. Overall, Loctite, you probably should use red, but blue is better than nothing. It's all I have, so that'll do the job. To remove the actual bottom of the shock from the hub, it's quite a tight fit. It's meant to be. You need to actually, there's a gap at the back where that little pin goes through in the centre. There's actually a gap. You can actually buy a special tool that kind of hooks over that little pin, and you tighten it down and it kind of spreads it apart. I just use this. This is off a lathe, I believe. I think it's off a lathe. It's a perfect size. It's got a low profile at the front and fat at the end. Basically just put that in and just tap it in, and that separates it enough that the hub actually comes off. If you're having a bit of difficulty getting the hub off, like I said, plenty of penetrating fluid from the top. You can also apply some to the bottom if you wish, but basically a good couple of stomps, not so much in the brake caliper. Try to hit the top of the disc, don't go crazy, don't put your full body weight on. It's more the actual shock than the weight and the pressure. And if that doesn't work, just get down beside it and wiggle it left and right. It will break free. It's just the rust that's kind of holding it on. If you're putting the spring back in, you've got the bolts at the top all in, that's all lined up perfectly fine. You come down and the pin at the back of the shock isn't perfectly in line with the actual hub, or the actual drop link won't bolt in because it's at an angle. If you just literally grab hold of where the drop link attaches and just slowly twist it around, it will line up. As long as that pin at the back of the shock lines up with the back of the hub and it slides in, you're fine. And I think I'm going to call this one here. If this video has helped you guys out, if you're maybe in the middle of doing an actual project on your car, maybe replacing the brakes, maybe replacing suspension, you just came across this video and it's helped you out, give you some information, please do leave a like down below and a comment. That will be muchly appreciated. I do have many other videos on this car, Range Rover Evoque, small engines, so if you're into that kind of content, then please do check out my channel and subscribe via there. That'll be muchly appreciated, and I will catch you next one. Later.